Hi, everybody. Dr. Nikita Vizniak here with the amazing.
Dr. Catherine Chung.
And today we're going to be taking you through a gluten-free diet. Now, Dr. Chung, it's pretty trendy for us to talk about this, and you hear about gluten all the time. Most
hmm
people, though, I find don't even know what the heck is the gluten.
Well, gluten is just this fun little molecule that's a protein that's inside specific grains. And then they just pretty much help with germination and seed development. So and that's why they have to be there
Mhm.
essentially. But for us humans, it just makes things very tacky and delicious.
All right. It does. Okay. It does actually. A lot of people really enjoy it. And you can sure taste the difference in the food when it's not there. But of course, all of our information we're taking from our evidence-informed nutrition textbook, 3 Easy Steps to Feel Better. You can do it.
We
We
can
can
help.
help. We're eating for optimal health here, of course, and Dr. Chung is one of our major contributors to this text. And we are going to go not low histamine, we are going gluten-free diet, clicking us ahead to that. All right, so we know that gluten is there. We see it as part of a natural seed process. It's required for growth for most of these. But what are we
Mhm.
talking about here when we see celiac disease brought up as the number one thing here?
Well, celiac disease is one of those autoimmune conditions that where you end up just attacking your own body, especially when the gluten is present, right? So
Mhm.
that's essentially what you want to think of that as, and that's why it's so important for celiac patients to be 1,000% gluten free because you will feel like absolute trash if you get any gluten in you, and that's like joint pain, cramping, like all the digestive stuff, but
Mhm.
you physically feel just so sick because of it as well.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the biggest things too. There's a lot of recommendations out there to talk about dealing with musculoskeletal pain and physical health and everything like that. And your diet can potentially play a huge role in how you feel,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Yeah. So now when we're going into this, the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's just very similar in terms of some of the symptoms that you would get. So if like you eat gluten and then you get the brain fog, you just get really tired. A lot of people will notice this after lunchtime when they eat something and then they're just like, oh, I got that 1 to 2 p.m. slump. That can be attributed to gluten sensitivity. You just don't necessarily have as intense or as crazy of a symptoms as celiac patients would.
Hmm.
Sometimes you might get digestive issues. Sometimes you won't get the digestive issues with it.
Yeah.
If you were gluten sensitive, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Generally, you'd see a more minor form of what you would see with more significant conditions like celiac.
Yeah,
All right, so when we're
yeah.
looking at the gluten-containing grains, we can see wheat, barley, rye are up there as big ones. And actually, a lot of people are surprised. I mean, barley, you're going to find that in a lot of your beers and stuff. And of course, rye and wheat, that's going to be a main thing in a lot of breads, a lot of pastas as well.
Mhm.
What other food sources should I be looking for that are containing high levels of gluten?
Generally, if you just think of any pasta like grains itself, unless it's like labeled as not as gluten free, will have
Hmm.
gluten in it. An easy way that I tell my patients, and you could tell your clients or patients, or even just like ways to remember what your gluten grains are, is going to be remembering eyebrows, BROWS. So it's going to be barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt. So
Yeah.
those are going to be your top five gluten grains. Even oats, so gluten-free oats do exist out there, but whether or not they are truly gluten-free is up for debate because
Yeah.
they could be in a facility that processes gluten essentially, right? But
Yep.
some of the things that I talk to my patients about, they're like, "Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that." Is dark spirits, whiskey,
Hmm.
bourbon, like all those do actually have gluten in them.
Yeah.
So
And
stick with clear spirits and you'll be fine.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, the other risks that we see associated with excessive alcohol consumption as well could also be confounding the issues that they're dealing with too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
All right, then we're gonna go look at this. I'm not saying no to alcohol because I have a massive wine collection, but I'm just saying moderation or checking your dosing on that a little bit.
Exactly. Actually, interestingly enough, there was this one because wine is technically gluten free, right? There shouldn't be
Mhm.
any gluten in it. But they were finding that there was this one tree that the bark and the wood itself had gluten in it, and then they started making these wine casks out of
Oh
it.
yeah,
And then when
yeah,
they
yeah,
put it in there, there was this one wine. I cannot remember for the life of me which one it was, but it actually ended up having gluten in it because of that of
yeah,
the barrel that they were aging it in, which was
yeah,
actually really
yeah.
interesting.
Just because
So
of the way it was processed, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Okay, well, let's be a little more positive here and focus on things. What can I look for gluten-free grains? Where should I be spending my time? What should I be eating here?
I try to get my patients to eat as varied of all the different grains as possible because there's no
Hmm.
one grain that's going to meet all of your needs, both mentally and satisfactorily, but also nutritionally as well.
Hmm.
So if we mix it all, I like to lean on either rice. You can do quinoa and even a nice like potato or soy are really good, easy, accessible things to kind of use. But like I said, for like breakfast options, usually is where most people are like, oh, I don't know what to eat for breakfast. Then that's where the gluten-free oats, the chia seed puddings come into play. You can go more on
Hmm.
the Asian route, and then you do like a congee, which is more like a rice pudding, more or less, and then you can
Yep.
dress it up how you want. So there, breakfast tends to be the hardest for most people with gluten-free or gluten-free lifestyle. So those are the things that you might want to look for and lean on a lot more.
All right, cool. Yeah, I know for me, I am a big fan of chia, flax, and tapioca. I loves me some good
Hmm.
tapioca. All right, now an interesting thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, you could be suffering from celiac or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and you could also be exacerbating your symptoms by foods that can potentially cross-react with the gluten.
It's crazy what cross reactivities can occur. Like milk and like you see, like milk and gluten can actually cross react. So what cross
Hmm.
reactivity just means is that the molecules look very similar, that your body's going to have a similar reaction to gluten as it would with all the other ones. And that's where when you're looking at the hypoallergenic diet or the elimination diet that we were talking about, those top four foods that you would normally eliminate out of those diets, which is going to be gluten, eggs, dairy, and corn, they
Hmm.
tend to all cross react, as you can see, and that's why those four are the top four that you would eliminate in general, anyways.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we see that across the board, exactly what you said on those diets. So we've already covered what gluten is. Let's maybe talk a little bit more about the symptomatology, so the identification that you might have a gluten intolerance. Usually I see with my patients is they actually
Mm-hmm.
have a high bread intake, like they just are eating so much wheat and bread. I'm just like, yeah, there might be something going on there.
Yeah, totally. Well, there are studies showing that if you eat anything more than 4 times a week, you're going to start creating antibodies against it and have an inflammatory reaction against it, right?
Hmm.
So it makes sense if you're eating a mono diet, then of course you're going to create these sensitivities against it. Now, when it comes to actual gluten intolerance symptoms, it's going to be more obvious ones are going to be like digestive stuff. So you get the bloating, you get abdominal pain, diarrhea, or constipation. But things that people don't really think about is their sinuses might get quite plugged up. Their rhinitis might get worse.
Hmm.
They might have like really foggy thinking afterwards, headaches, even trouble losing weight or mood changes might be something to be attributed to gluten sensitivity as well.
Hmm.
So things that you don't really think about that are like, oh, maybe that is the case, and it just goes back to the whole gut brain connection, right? So
Yep.
if there's a gut issue, then it's going to affect the brain issue and everything in between.
Hmm.
And then mucosal stuff as well, mucosal membrane stuff, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. I mean, that's what we see across the board. Even the skin. I mean, again, the skin is always a good sign of GI inflammation and everything as well, right? That's a given known for most of us as doctors.
Well,
But
I mean, it's biggest one of your biggest detoxifiers, right? So
yeah, yeah.
it's gotta present this at one point in time.
Absolutely. So when we're looking at these low gluten or no gluten diets, there's benefits outside of celiac that we can see with it, right? So maybe we can discuss some of those here really quick.
Well, exactly what you're chatting about, Dr. Nick, where within your patient demographic, you're seeing a lot of joint pain and skin issues, right? And that's something that you can see or assess really easily,
Hmm.
and you'll make a correlation between your patients eating bread all day, every day, and them having worsening joint pain and stuff. And it just goes back to the inflammation and the inflammatory process that we were talking about with all of these diets, but specifically with the gluten free one, right?
Hmm. And then we see other conditions here too, as well. Like these gluten diets can improve, these low gluten diets can improve, sorry, gluten diets. I'm going on a high gluten diet. These low gluten diets can improve skin appearance and function as well with psoriasis, eczema, all of those good things.
Mhm. Well, I mean, that makes sense, right? If you're again looking back at the inflammation and the creating inflammation will reduce your ability to heal up the skin barrier.
Hmm.
But also with a lot of these inflammatory issues, there's going to be an immune component to it, which has shown to have high correlations with psoriasis and eczema, where if you have a high histamine or a high immune reactions to things, your skin's going to be probably one of the first things that are going to start having issues. And it's not listed on here, but there's a high correlation with acne and it being improved with decreased inflammation
Yep.
from a gluten-free diet as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the big things to talk about here just a little bit, there's actually references and research that you can decrease depressive levels by changing over to this diet potentially if you are gluten sensitive.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, inside gluten, there's gliadin as well, right? So gliadin and casein, those which comes from dairy, those two have been shown um, to what's the word? Link onto the morphine receptors in your brain.
Hmm.
And they act very similar to that of morphine. So, if you think about it, those molecules that are attaching onto the receptors in your brain are going to fog you even more or worsen your mental health solely because they're pretty much doping you up in that sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they're blocking receptors that could be used for other for the things that really would be positive in your life as part of the hormone
Mhm.
balance. Okay, so now usually for most of our patients when we're looking at these gluten diets, usually what we just recommend is just try a low gluten diet for a while and see how your symptoms change. But there are other ways to actually diagnose gluten sensitivity, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So if you're looking at gluten sensitivity itself, then that's where the food sensitivity tests come into play
Hmm.
because they're looking at IgG, which is more sensitivity based antibodies.
Hmm.
But if you're thinking you have true celiac disease, that's where you would do a blood test to look at your transglutaminase antibodies,
Hmm.
which is an antibody created to attack the tissue, which makes it a more of an autoimmune disease, hence the celiac side of things. And then they would just do the next step after that would be a intestinal biopsy as well, and those
Yeah.
would be the top two things as a way to truly diagnose yourself with celiac disease. The
Hmm.
downfall to those testings, though, is that you actually have to eat a bunch of gluten and put your body through like absolute hell to actually test it
But
properly.
that's exactly it. And this is one of the key things with any testing that you do, diagnostic imaging, all the way through biopsies, whatever else it is. You actually want to have your evaluation done when you are in the most inflamed state so you can actually see better results and more likely to actually come up with the correct diagnosis. It's like
Oh,
taking your car into the
100%.
mechanic that's making a noise all the time. And then when you take it in, it stops making the noise and like, well, I can't really tell you what's going on. Well, it's the same kind of thing, right? If you're actually in one of those lower phases where your inflammatory rates are down, it can give you false negatives around what most of your condition is like for most of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, that's why I talk to my patients about when it comes to food sensitivity testing as well. I'm just like, if there's any foods that you're wondering about, just eat a bunch of it for like 3 days in a row, come back and get it tested. But
Hmm.
if there are things that like are going to actually be an issue, it's not going to pop up on the test because you're not exposing yourself to it. But at the end of the day, do we really need to test it to tell us that this is an issue when like when you eat it, there's a direct correlation, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that's the whole thing about whether the tests are worth doing or not. You're better off just trying a sample run of modifying your diet and see how you go for a couple, 3 months and see how everything is. And then if you're really still lost, symptoms aren't getting better, then you go into your testing typically, right?
Oh, totally. And that's the whole thought behind whether you should test or not is would the testing actually change the direction of your treatment? If
Hmm.
the answer is yes, then yeah, you should go down that testing route. But if it's no, then really is there a point? Unless you're the type of person that likes to see black and whites, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But that's the whole problem, even looking at the body here. We're going off on a little bit of a tangent with the different testing and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Is
Yeah.
even the tests that you do will change. Like if I did a blood test in the morning, afternoon, evening, if I had just eaten, not eaten, you'll see drastic changes in the actual results that you get, right? So yeah, a lot of people think these things are black and white and they're not. Multifactorial in most cases. All right, like most diets, though, what do we have to do? We have to go ahead and watch for risks where you could become nutrient deficient. What are some key things that we should probably know about these, Dr. Chung?
So a lot of the gluten foods are actually quite highly fortified.
Hmm.
So unless you are not like getting enough sun or you are following a very strict plant-based diet or plant-forward diet, then then where was I going? So then you might have to use supplements to actually what's it called? Fortify yourself with these things. So
Yeah, to
like
avoid
vitamin
them.
D3,
Yeah.
like it is fortified in dairy products essentially, right? And that's where a lot of people will get it from. So if you're
Hmm.
avoiding dairy because of the cross reactivity, then you might be D3 deficient. So it's either spend half an hour outside in the sun when it's sunny or take some vitamin D3.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, pretty standard stuff right there.
Hmm.
Okay, and then there is some controversial stuff out there we felt compelled to put into the book. Is it gluten or glycophosphates? Okay. Or
Tell
phosphate.
us a little bit about
Yeah.
that, Dr. Nick.
Yeah. So basically, we know what these are. These are basically using herbicides to break down plants. And theoretically, you are told on the labels that these things fully break down in the environment. However, there are some sources, significant sources of research that talk about this potentially, like Roundup is one of the common name brands that's actually used. And these are potentially used or potentially found in the environment and could be resulting in very similar symptoms to what we see with gluten sensitivity or modifying gluten sensitivity or autoimmune conditions. It's kind of up in the air right now how significant this actually is, but there is a lot of controversial research around it. I don't know if you have any takes on that, Dr. Chung, but that's kind of one of the things we came across in the literature.
No, I 100% agree on that one. And that's why there's, I mean, they've been talking about it for years with the whole class action lawsuit against Monsanto's and Roundup for this reason, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so just to kind of recap right here, we're going to go ahead and just finish off the gluten-free diet. This is what your table is probably going to look like right here, what your plate is going to look like. Half non-starchy fruits and veg, maybe some lean organic proteins if you can find those, and whole grains and starchy vegetables as well. And what are we trying to avoid here with this one, Dr. Chung?
Gluten. So it's going to be,
Gluten.
so remember browse, BROWS. So barley, rye, oats, wheat, spelt. So long as you remember your browse, you'll pretty much hit all of the top contenders for gluten.
Yeah, and then going back on that a little bit too, I like what you said before. When you're looking at your liqueurs and different alcohols, if they are a wheat-based or grain-based, those can also be strong sources of gluten as well. And of course, a lot of our breads are not gluten-free, so just be aware that even sometimes you see them labeled. I saw a documentary talking about how people are labeling things as gluten-free and they're not actually gluten-free. They might be reduced gluten or something like that.
Which is insane. I think it does depend on where you live as well. I think like I know in Italy like they're real strict on it that like you have to like go through such a vetting process to even say you're gluten free.
But Dr. Chung, bring this because we were talking about this before the interview right here. You were talking about how if you eat breads in North America and then you go and travel to Italy, like you might actually be able to tolerate those a little bit better. There was a couple of reasons that I thought were great that you brought up around that.
Yeah, a lot of it's just again the vetting process around gluten, what's considered gluten free, what is not considered gluten free.
Yep.
So if you're a celiac patient, they're probably one of the best places to go travel because when it says gluten free, for sure it is.
Mm-hmm.
But also for a lot of my gluten sensitive patients, they can't actually eat gluten here, and I think it's because of how it's being processed, the processing and how they're creating these products compared to in Italy when they travel over there, they can eat as much bread as possible and they don't have any of the symptomology that they have here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's solely due to the quality of the foods, but also the processing of the food as
Yeah.
well. But I hear that a lot just in general. Like I have my Brazilian patients, or I have my patients that come from Hong Kong where they're like, I can eat whatever, I can eat the seafood there, I can eat whatever I want there. But when I
Mm-hmm.
come to Canada or North America, it's just not the same. And then they start developing these sensitivities against these foods.
Yeah. Interesting observations. And these are the kind of things that kind of start as almost a grassroots observation. We have doctors out in the field are making these general observations, and then eventually someone decides maybe we should do a study on this and kind of run our way through that. But all right, Dr. Chung, as always, you are a wealth of knowledge, and thank you so much for your time with us today. We'll see you in the next video or at a continuing education seminar near you.
Thank you for having me. Bye
Okay,
now.
bye.